Hello there, and welcome back. Tonight we are going to ride slowly through the entire lore of Arthur Morgan, from the parts of his life that happened before Red Dead Redemption 2 begins, to the long winter in Coulter, the camps at Horseshoe Overlook, Clemens Point, Shady Bell, Lakay, and Beaver Hollow, all the way to the mountain where his story finally stops being about survival and becomes about what a man chooses to leave behind. Arthur's life is not only the story of an outlaw with a gun and a horse, it is the story of a boy raised by thieves, a son who lost almost every kind of home, a man who learned loyalty before he learned tenderness, and a dying soul who slowly discovered that redemption does not need to erase the past in order to matter. So settle in gently, let the fire burn low, let the camp sounds soften, let the horses shift in the dark, and let Arthur Morgan's whole life come forward slowly, like a memory told beside the last embers of a long night. Arthur Morgan was born in 1863, during the American Civil War, though the war itself is not the centre of his personal lore. It matters more as atmosphere, as the kind of broken world he was born into. A world of violence, displacement, poverty, wounded families, and men already learning to solve fear with weapons. His mother was Beatrice Morgan, and she died when Arthur was still very young. His father was Lyle Morgan, a petty criminal and a hard man whose influence on Arthur seems to have been more damaging than loving. Arthur later keeps a photograph of his father, but the way he speaks about him suggests bitterness, disappointment, and the strange ache of still remembering someone who did not deserve tenderness. Arthur's father was eventually arrested and hanged for larceny when Arthur was about 11. That detail says a great deal about Arthur's early life. He didn't come from a stable home that was later ruined by outlaw romance. He came from loss and criminality, before Dutch van der Linde ever found him. A dead mother, a criminal father, and a childhood shaped by poverty left Arthur with no clean model of goodness. Before he learned Dutch's speeches about freedom and civilization, he already knew that the world could take parents away, that law could kill, that hunger could shape choices, and that a boy could be left with almost nothing but resentment and instinct. Dutch van der Linde and Hosea Matthews found Arthur when he was around 14 years old. That meeting is one of the most important events in Arthur's life, because Dutch and Hosea became the closest thing he had to parents after childhood broke apart. Dutch gave him vision, language, confidence, and the feeling of being chosen. Hosea gave him patience, craft, restraint, and a warmer form of guidance. Arthur did not join the gang as a fully formed outlaw. He grew inside it. The van der Linde gang became his school, family, church, army, shelter, and trap all at once. Dutch saw something in Arthur that could be shaped. Arthur was strong, angry, loyal, and wounded. The kind of boy who could become dangerous if someone taught him that danger had a noble purpose. Dutch was gifted at that kind of teaching. He could take crimes committed for survival or profit and wrap them in the language of freedom, brotherhood, and resistance to a corrupt world. To a lonely boy with no real home, that must have sounded like salvation. Dutch did not simply teach Arthur how to steal. He taught Arthur how to believe that stealing could belong to a dream. Hosea's influence was different. Hosea was a con man, but he had a quieter intelligence than Dutch, a dry wisdom, and a clearer sense of when violence was wasteful. If Dutch gave Arthur fire, Hosea gave him technique. From Hosea, Arthur learned scams, hunting, patience, reading a room, and the practical side of survival. Hosea also gave Arthur a glimpse of what the gang could be at its best. Not merely reckless robbers, but a strange travelling family using wit, charm, and nerve to stay ahead of a world closing in. Arthur's tragedy is that he absorbed both men deeply, but Dutch's voice often drowned out Hosea's caution, until it was almost too late. As Arthur grew, he became one of the gang's most trusted enforcers. He was not the official leader, but by the time Red Dead Redemption 2 begins, he is the man everyone expects to handle what must be handled. He collects debts, escorts weaker members, breaks people out of trouble, hunts food, carries out robberies, protects camp, and does the ugly work that keeps Dutch's dream alive. This position gives Arthur status, but it also traps him. He is important because he is useful. His loyalty becomes a form of labour, and his strength becomes the reason others can avoid looking too closely at the violence under the gang's ideals. Arthur's relationship with Dutch is therefore deeply personal. Dutch is not just his boss. Dutch is the man who found him, raised him, praised him, used him, and taught him what to think about the world. Arthur spends much of his life believing Dutch is larger than ordinary men, wiser, braver, more generous, more visionary. Even when Arthur jokes, complains, or doubts, his identity is built around the assumption that Dutch's dream means something. To stop believing in Dutch would not simply be a change of opinion, it would be a collapse of Arthur's emotional foundation. The young Arthur also knew John Marston as a brother long before the events of the game. John joined the gang when he was a boy, younger than Arthur, and Dutch took him in as well. This made John and Arthur two sons of the same outlaw father, but their relationship is not soft at the beginning of Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur resents John's immaturity, especially the fact that John ran away from the gang for about a year and abandoned Abigail and Jack. Arthur's anger at John is partly moral, partly brotherly, and partly self-protective. John does what Arthur never allowed himself to do. He leaves. Arthur's resentment toward John has another hidden layer. Arthur once had a son of his own. His son's name was Isaac, and Isaac's mother was a young waitress named Eliza. Arthur was not married to Eliza, and he was not a full-time father, but he visited them when he could and gave them money. Then one day he found out that both Eliza and Isaac had been murdered by robbers for only $10. This is one of the darkest pieces of Arthur's backstory, and it explains much of his buried grief. He did have a chance at family, however imperfect, and it was destroyed brutally, cheaply, and without meaning. The death of Isaac and Eliza changed Arthur in ways he rarely says plainly. It hardened him, but it also left a buried tenderness that never fully died. When he sees John neglecting Abigail and Jack, he's not only judging a younger brother, he's seeing a father waste something Arthur lost forever. Arthur may not know how to say that cleanly, because he is not a man trained to confess pain. Instead, it comes out as insults, anger, and harsh advice. Under the bitterness, though, there is a simple wound. Arthur knows what it means to never be able to go back to a child. Mary Linton is another part of Arthur's earlier life, and she represents the life he might have had if he'd been able to leave the gang before the gang became everything. Mary and Arthur loved each other when they were younger. She saw goodness in him, and he loved her with a sincerity that still embarrasses and wounds him years later. But Mary's family, especially her father, disapproved of Arthur because he was an outlaw. Arthur, for his part, could not or would not choose Mary over Dutch and the gang. Their love ended not because feeling disappeared, but because Arthur's life made ordinary love nearly impossible. Mary remains important because she's one of the few people who remembers Arthur as a man who could have been different. To Dutch, Arthur is a son, soldier, and instrument. To the gang, he's protector and provider. To enemies, he's a frightening outlaw. To Mary, he's someone whose better self was always visible but never fully free. That is why her letters hurt him. They do not simply call back romance, they call back possibility. Mary is proof that Arthur once stood near a door out of the life and did not walk through it. By 1899, when Red Dead Redemption 2 begins, Arthur is 36 years old. He's no longer the angry boy Dutch found, but he's not become a settled man either. He's experienced, feared, loyal, weary, and quietly intelligent. The gang is fleeing after the Blackwater ferry job goes terribly wrong. The exact details of the Blackwater incident remain partly hidden, but its consequences are clear. Money is left behind, several people are dead, lawmen and Pinkertons are in pursuit, and the gang is forced into the mountains during a brutal storm. Arthur enters the main story already carrying years of violence, and now the life he trusts is beginning to break. The opening in Coulter is important because it strips the gang down to survival. Snow, hunger, cold, injuries and fear make Dutch's grand philosophy feel smaller for a while. Arthur helps search for John, rescues people, fights O'Driscolls, hunts food, and tries to hold camp together. In this chapter, Arthur's role is practical. He does not need to explain himself. People need food, shelter, and protection, and Arthur provides them. This is one of the first ways the story shows his goodness without making him soft. He is useful because he has learned to survive in hard conditions, but usefulness is also the mask his care wears. Arthur's rescue of John in the mountains is a perfect early picture of their relationship. He complains, mocks John, calls him foolish, and still risks himself to bring him home. That is Arthur in miniature. His mouth is rougher than his heart. He often uses sarcasm as a fence around tenderness, especially with people he loves. John returns mauled by wolves, weak and barely alive, while Arthur grumbles through the work of saving him. The resentment is real, but so is the devotion. Arthur may call John an idiot, but he does not leave him in the snow. The fight with the O'Driscolls at Coulter also brings Arthur back into the old gang war. Colm O'Driscoll is Dutch's longtime enemy, and the feud between the Van der Lindes and O'Driscolls has consumed years. Arthur hates the O'Driscolls almost automatically, because the gang's enemies are his enemies. Yet even early on, the feud carries a sense of old waste. Men keep dying because leaders keep remembering. Dutch and Colm both speak as if their conflict has meaning, but from the outside it looks like another cycle of pride, revenge and bodies. When the gang comes down from the mountains and settles near Horseshoe Overlook, the tone changes. The snow gives way to green hills, open country, Valentine, campfires, chores, jokes, drinking, and the illusion that things might recover. Horseshoe Overlook is one of the warmest camps in the story, and Arthur seems almost comfortable there. He teases people, brings in food, contributes money, listens to songs, and moves between camp and town with a sense of purpose. For a little while, the gang feels like a family again, but even at Horseshoe Overlook, Arthur's life shows its contradictions. He can take Jack fishing gently and then beat a debtor the same day. He can write thoughtful notes in his journal and then rob a train. He can be kind to Mary Beth or Tilly and brutal to strangers. The game does not separate these parts into two different Arthurs. They are the same man. His tragedy is not that he has no conscience. It is that he has trained himself to keep working for a life that demands he ignore it. Arthur's journal is one of the most important windows into his lore. In speech, Arthur often hides behind jokes, threats, and bluntness. In the journal, he draws animals, landscapes, people, buildings, and strange details with surprising care. He writes observations that can be funny, sad, self-critical, or quietly poetic. The journal proves that Arthur is more attentive than his role suggests. He is not only muscle, he is a watcher. He notices the world, records it, and draws beauty even while living violently inside it. The journal also changes depending on Arthur's honour and experiences. A higher honour Arthur becomes more openly reflective, regretful, and tender, while a lower honour path can feel harsher. But even across variations, the journal gives him interiority. It reveals that he thinks about what he has done, even when he cannot fully stop doing it. In a story full of loud speeches from Dutch, Arthur's quiet drawings may be more honest than any campfire sermon. The Downes debt collection is the hidden hinge of Arthur's story. Thomas Downes owes money to Leopold Strauss, and Arthur goes to collect. Downes is sick, poor and weak, but Arthur beats him in front of his family. The scene is ugly because it is ordinary within the gang's business. It is not a glorious robbery or a dramatic gunfight. It is a strong man hurting a dying man over debt. During this encounter, Downes coughs blood onto Arthur. That moment passes quickly, but it plants the tuberculosis that will eventually kill him. The importance of Downes is moral as well as medical. Arthur's illness does not come from a heroic sacrifice. It comes from cruelty performed as routine work. That is what makes it so powerful. The sickness enters him at the exact point where his life as an enforcer is most shameful. Tuberculosis becomes not a random plot device, but the physical return of a life spent doing harm for people who call it necessary. The disease is not a punishment from heaven in a simple sense, but it feels like consequence made flesh. Arthur does not know right away what has happened. He continues living as before, robbing, helping, threatening, joking, riding, and obeying Dutch. That delay is important. For much of the story, Arthur is already dying without knowing it. His body carries the future while his mind remains trapped in the old routine. This gives many early and middle missions a tragic shadow after the fact. Arthur thinks he has time to keep serving the gang's dream. The body knows otherwise. Valentine gives Arthur a strong taste of ordinary society and its messiness. The town is rough, muddy, crowded, and full of cattlemen, drunks, working women, lawmen, shopkeepers, and men looking for trouble. Arthur can brawl in the saloon, get drunk with Lenny, rescue people, rob, trade, bathe, and move through the kind of town the gang both needs and despises. Valentine is not civilization in its polished form. It is frontier society with all its smells and hypocrisies. Arthur belongs there and does not belong there at the same time. The night out with Lenny is one of Arthur's most human moments. It is funny, chaotic, warm, and almost innocent compared with the darker missions around it. Arthur and Lenny drink too much, lose track of each other, stumble through the saloon, and turn into ordinary fools for a night. That mission matters because Lenny is young, bright, and full of life, and Arthur genuinely likes him. Later, when Lenny dies in St. Denis, the memory of their drunken laughter makes the loss sharper. The story lets Arthur have joy before it takes the boy away. Arthur's bond with Hosea also deepens in the early chapters. Hosea can tease Arthur, correct him, and speak to him with a familiarity that Dutch cannot always match. Hosea knows Arthur's strengths and weaknesses. He understands that Arthur is loyal, but he also sees the danger of Dutch's growing recklessness. When Arthur hunts the legendary bear with Hosea, the scene is not only about hunting, it is about an older mentor and a grown son sharing a piece of the life they have built together, even as that life approaches collapse. The legendary bear hunt also shows Arthur's relationship to nature. He is a skilled hunter, not only because the gang needs food, but because he understands tracking, patience, and the quiet language of wilderness. Arthur often seems more at peace in forests, mountains, and open plains than in towns. Civilization crowds him, judges him, and reflects his crimes back at him. The wilderness lets him move without explanation. It does not forgive him, but it does not lecture him either. Mary Linton's return during the Valentine period reopens the old wound. She asks Arthur to help her brother Jamie, who has joined the Chelonians, a strange religious group. Arthur grumbles, but he goes. The mission is revealing because Mary still knows he will help, even if he complains. Arthur rescues Jamie not for money, not for Dutch, and not for the gang. He does it because Mary asks and because some part of him still wants to be the man she believes might exist. Arthur's meeting with Mary is full of restraint and regret. They do not speak like people whose feelings are gone. They speak like people who know feeling was not enough. Arthur is embarrassed by his own softness around her. Mary is frustrated because she sees his goodness, but also sees that he remains tied to a life that ruins everything it touches. Their relationship is painful because neither is entirely wrong. Mary asks too much of a man still bound to the gang, and Arthur gives too little to the life that might have saved him. Micah Bell's role becomes clearer as the gang settles into its rhythm. Arthur distrusts Micah from early on, and that instinct proves correct. Micah is violent without warmth, opportunistic without loyalty, and flattering toward Dutch in a way that feeds Dutch's worst instincts. Arthur is violent too, but Micah's violence feels different. Arthur can feel guilt, show care, and imagine limits. Micah treats cruelty as freedom. The contrast between them becomes one of the story's central moral lines. Arthur breaking Micah out of jail in Strawberry is one of those missions where loyalty to Dutch forces Arthur into something ugly. Micah turns the escape into a massacre, killing with pleasure and leaving chaos behind. Arthur is disgusted, but he still participates because the gang needs Micah back, or because Dutch says so, or because loyalty has trained Arthur to accept bad work as necessary. The Strawberry Massacre plants another seed of doubt. Arthur sees that Micah is not merely troublesome, he is poisonous. The move to Clemens Point brings the gang into Lemoyne, where the air is warmer, the politics older, and the illusions more elaborate. Rhodes appears charming at first, a southern town full of manners, old families, and hidden rot. Dutch tries to play the Grey and Braithwaite families against each other, believing the gang can profit from their feud. Arthur participates, but the whole scheme exposes the gang's arrogance. They think they are manipulating local history. In reality, they are stepping into a swamp of pride, slavery's aftermath, inherited hatred, and family violence. Arthur's time in Rhodes is important because it shows him inside Dutch's confidence game at a larger scale. Dutch wants to believe he can outthink everyone: families, sheriffs, plantation aristocrats, and local power structures. Arthur helps carry out the plan, but he often seems less enchanted by it than Dutch. He does the work, but he notices when things smell wrong. His skepticism grows slowly, not as rebellion at first, but as irritation, discomfort, and tired common sense. Sean Maguire's death in Rhodes is one of the first sudden shocks of the gang's collapse. Sean is loud, funny, annoying, young, and alive in the way camp needs. His death happens abruptly during what should have been another tense but manageable encounter. A bullet cuts him down and the mood changes instantly. Arthur has seen death before, but Sean's death feels like a warning that the old rhythm is ending. The gang's luck is thinning and youth is no protection. Arthur's relationship with Sadie Adler also develops across these chapters. When the gang first finds Sadie at Coulter, she is traumatized, widowed, and furious after the O'Driscolls murder her husband. At first, she's a rescued woman in camp. Over time, she becomes one of the fiercest people in the gang, not because she was made into something by Arthur, but because her grief hardens into action. Arthur respects her more and more because she refuses to remain helpless, and because her anger is honest in a way Dutch's speeches are not. Sadie and Arthur eventually form one of the strongest partnerships in the story. They are not romantic. Their bond is built on mutual recognition. Both are damaged. Both are capable of violence. Both understand loss. but Sadie's loyalty becomes clearer than many others because she does not hide behind grand theories. She hates the O'Driscolls because they destroyed her life. She helps John and Abigail because they deserve help. Arthur can trust that directness, especially as Dutch becomes harder to read. The Braithwaite chapter reaches its emotional peak when Jack Marston is kidnapped. This is one of the moments when the gang's family identity becomes real. Whatever crimes they commit, they love that boy. Arthur rides with the gang to Braithwaite Manor, and the attack is one of the most powerful displays of collective rage in the game. The image of the gang walking toward the mansion together is dramatic because it is one of the last times they feel truly united. For a moment, all the fractures disappear under one purpose: bring Jack home. But Jack's kidnapping also exposes the cost of Dutch's games. The gang's schemes with the Greys and Braithwaites bring danger onto a child. Dutch may frame the response as righteous, and in the moment it is, but the cause lies partly in the gang's arrogance. Arthur feels the danger of that even if he does not say it fully. The line between protecting family and endangering family becomes harder to ignore. The search for Jack leads the gang to Angelo Bronte in St. Denis, and St. Denis changes the story's atmosphere completely. The city is crowded, industrial, smoky, rich, poor, modern, and hostile to the gang's old frontier identity. Arthur is a man of horses, campfires, and open roads, forced into streetcars, alleys, mansions, police patrols, factories, and urban politics. St. Denis makes the future physical. It shows the world Dutch's dream cannot outrun. Arthur's discomfort in St. Denis is not only personal taste. The city represents the closing of space. Outlaws can hide in mountains and forests for a while, but telegraphs, trains, banks, police, private detectives and urban networks make the old life harder. Dutch keeps talking about freedom somewhere beyond the next score, but St. Denis shows that modern power has already arrived. Arthur feels that pressure even before he understands it. The walls are moving inward. Angelo Bronte is another mirror for Dutch. Bronte is a criminal, but he wears civilization's clothes. He lives in a mansion, has influence, speaks with refinement, and uses law and corruption as extensions of himself. Dutch despises men like Bronte, but he is also fascinated by their power. Arthur sees through Bronte more clearly. Bronte is not proof that civilization is better than outlaw life. He is proof that crime can become respectable when it has enough money and connections. The trolley station robbery in St. Denis is a turning point because it reveals Dutch's planning beginning to rot. The job is based on Bronte's information, but it goes badly, and the gang escapes after a violent crash. Dutch suffers a head injury during the mission, and many discussions of his later behaviour focus on whether this injury worsens his instability. But even before the crash, Dutch's flaws are present. The injury may sharpen them, but it does not create them from nothing. Arthur's tragedy is watching traits that were always there become impossible to excuse. Dutch's murder of Bronte is one of the most disturbing moments for Arthur. After kidnapping Bronte, Dutch drowns him and feeds him to an alligator. Arthur watches with visible unease. This is not a clean tactical decision. It is rage, humiliation, and cruelty dressed as justice. Dutch has killed before, but this feels different because it is intimate and unnecessary. Arthur's belief in Dutch cracks more deeply here, even if he still cannot say the whole truth aloud. The St. Denis bank robbery is the catastrophe that breaks the gang's middle dream. The plan is supposed to be the great score that will let them escape, but it becomes a slaughter. Hosea is captured and executed by Agent Milton in front of the bank. Lenny is shot during the rooftop escape. John is arrested. The gang is scattered. Arthur loses the two people who represented very different parts of his emotional life. Hosea, the father of caution and affection, and Lenny, the younger brother whose future should have been ahead of him. Hosea's death removes the gang's conscience and balance. As long as Hosea lives, Dutch has someone beside him who can challenge, advise, and temper him. Arthur can doubt, but Hosea has seniority and intimacy with Dutch that Arthur does not fully claim. When Hosea dies, Dutch loses the last person who might have slowed his descent. Arthur loses a father figure, and the gang loses one of its last anchors. The story after St. Denis feels colder because Hosea's voice is gone. Lenny's death is different, but just as devastating. Lenny is young, intelligent, and kind enough to make the future seem possible. He's not innocent in a pure sense, but he has not become hardened beyond recognition. Arthur likes him, respects him, and perhaps sees in him the young man John might have been, or the son Isaac never became. Lenny dies quickly, almost cruelly quickly, on a rooftop during escape. Arthur barely has time to react. That is how the collapse works now. Loss comes faster than grief can process. Guarma follows the failed bank robbery, and it feels almost unreal. Arthur, Dutch, Micah, Bill, and Javier wash up on a tropical island far from the world they know. Guarma is beautiful, but it is not paradise. It is a place of sugar plantations, revolution, exploitation, and violence. The chapter matters because it strips the gang down again, but not in the clean survival way Coulter did. In Coulter, the gang was cold but still together. In Guarma, they are displaced, desperate, and morally disoriented. Arthur's illness becomes more visible after Guarma. The shipwreck, heat, exhaustion, and stress wear him down. He coughs more. He looks weaker. His body's beginning to tell the truth he has not yet been forced to hear. Guarma also shows Dutch becoming more ruthless. He kills Gloria, an old woman who guides them through caves, because he does not want to pay her and does not trust her. Arthur is horrified. This is another point where Dutch's violence feels less like necessity and more like the revelation of character. When the gang returns from Guarma, they are no longer recovering, they are unravelling. The camp at Lakay is temporary, swampy, and exposed. Pinkertons find them quickly. Molly O'Shea claims she betrayed the gang, though later it is suggested she did not give the Pinkertons anything meaningful. Susan Grimshaw kills Molly in camp, and the moment is brutal because it shows the gang devouring its own under pressure. Love, jealousy, fear, and suspicion have become deadly inside the family. Arthur's diagnosis in St. Denis is the point where his inner story changes forever. After collapsing in the street, he wakes in the doctor's office and learns he has tuberculosis. In 1899, this is essentially a death sentence. The doctor's advice is simple and impossible. Go somewhere warm and dry, rest, avoid strain. Arthur has no life that allows such rest. He walks out into the city knowing that the body he's used as the gang's strongest tool is failing, and there is no robbery, gunfight, or plan that can beat it. The diagnosis does not instantly make Arthur good. That is important. He does not walk out of the doctor's office as a saint, but it changes the direction of his attention. Time becomes visible. The future shrinks. Dutch's promises of one more score, one more escape, one more plan begin to sound emptier because Arthur no longer has the luxury of believing in endless tomorrows. Dying forces him to ask what his remaining days are worth. Arthur's tuberculosis also changes how the world sees him. Strangers notice his coughing. His face becomes gaunt. His eyes sink. His movements lose some of their earlier power. For a man whose identity has been built on strength, this is terrifying. Arthur has been useful because he could endure almost anything. Now his body refuses to be the gang's instrument. The illness takes away the mask of invincibility, and underneath it the conscience has more room to speak. The encounters with Edith Downes and her son Archie become part of Arthur's moral reckoning. Arthur helped destroy their family by collecting Strauss's debt from Thomas Downes, and after Thomas dies, Edith and Archie fall into poverty, humiliation, and danger. When Arthur sees them later, he cannot pretend the debt business is harmless. He is confronted not by an abstract sin, but by people whose lives his actions helped ruin. His attempts to help them are not enough to undo the damage, but they matter because he finally stops defending the system that harmed them. Arthur's confrontation with Strauss is one of his clearest moral breaks from the gang's old business. Strauss's money lending is legalistic cruelty, loans to desperate people enforced by men like Arthur. When Arthur throws Strauss out of camp, he's not pretending he himself is innocent. He's rejecting a particular form of predation that he can no longer stomach. It is a late act, imperfect and hypocritical in some ways, but it is real. Arthur is cutting one thread between himself and the worst version of the gang. The Beaver Hollow camp is where the Van der Linde dream becomes almost unrecognisable. The cave is dark, damp and claustrophobic, a terrible contrast to Horseshoe Overlook's open beauty. People are frightened, supplies are low, Dutch is paranoid. Micah's influence grows. The gang no longer feels like a family hiding from the law. It feels like a hunted cult orbiting a leader who cannot admit failure. Arthur sees it, and the sickness in his body makes the sickness in the gang harder to deny. Arthur's relationship with Rainsfall and Eagle Flies becomes one of the most important late-game moral threads. The Wapiti story shows another people being manipulated, displaced and crushed by government power. Dutch tries to use their conflict for his own purposes, encouraging violence that will distract the army and serve the gang's needs. Arthur, especially through Rainsfall, begins to see the cruelty of using another group's suffering as a tool. This is one of the clearest places where Arthur starts to separate himself from Dutch's logic. Rainsfall offers Arthur a different kind of masculinity and leadership. He is patient, grieving, restrained, and deeply aware of loss. He does not mistake revenge for wisdom. He wants to protect his people, even when his son Eagle Flies is drawn toward war. Arthur respects him because Rainsfall's sorrow has dignity. In conversations with Rainsfall, Arthur can be honest in a way he rarely is elsewhere. He speaks of sickness, regret, and fear. The old chief becomes a quiet witness to Arthur's late transformation. Eagle Flies, by contrast, represents youth, pride, anger, and the understandable hunger to fight back. Arthur does not look down on him, because Arthur knows what anger can do when it feels righteous. But he also sees Dutch feeding that anger for selfish reasons. Arthur's attempt to save Eagle Flies is partly an attempt to stop another young man from being spent by older men's plans. When Eagle Flies dies, the tragedy lands with the same pattern Arthur has seen again and again. Youth used, hope manipulated, bodies left behind. The mission where Dutch leaves Arthur behind at the Cornwall oil fields is one of the final emotional breaks. Arthur is trapped, struggling, and Dutch looks at him, then walks away. It is a small motion compared with the violence around them, but it reveals everything. Dutch can abandon Arthur when Arthur is no longer useful or when saving him is inconvenient. For a man who has spent his life as Dutch's loyal son, this is devastating. Arthur may have doubted Dutch before, but being left to die makes the truth personal. Dutch later denies or avoids the meaning of that abandonment, but Arthur knows what he saw. This is where loyalty stops being noble and starts looking like self-harm. Arthur has given Dutch his life, his strength, his conscience, and his youth. Dutch gives him speeches, demands, and finally abandonment. The bond does not vanish instantly. because bonds that deep do not break cleanly. But Arthur can no longer believe in Dutch the way he did. Arthur's bond with John changes dramatically in the late story. At the beginning, Arthur sees John as irresponsible, childish, and ungrateful. By the end, Arthur sees John as the one person who still has a chance to leave with a family. This shift is not sentimental. Arthur still insults him. He still sees John's flaws. But he also sees Abigail and Jack, and he understands that John's escape might be the only meaningful thing left. Arthur cannot save the gang. He may not be able to save himself, but he might save John. Abigail Roberts becomes crucial here. Arthur respects Abigail more deeply as the story progresses, because she sees the gang's collapse clearly and fights for her son. She has fewer illusions than many others. When Jack is threatened, she acts. When John is imprisoned, she demands help. When Dutch hesitates, she recognizes betrayal faster than people who are still trapped by loyalty. Arthur's decision to help her is one of the ways he stops serving Dutch and starts serving a future. Sadie's rescue of John from Sasika Penitentiary with Arthur is one of the great late-game acts of defiance. Dutch refuses to prioritize John, but Arthur and Sadie go anyway. This mission matters because Arthur is choosing loyalty to a person over loyalty to Dutch's command. The old gang logic would say Dutch decides. Arthur's new morality says John should not be abandoned. Sadie's presence makes the act sharper, because she too has stopped waiting for Dutch to be the man he claims to be. John's return from prison does not heal the gang, it exposes the fracture. Dutch is irritated, suspicious, and increasingly cold toward those who question him. Micah whispers. Arthur watches. Abigail sees. John slowly understands. The family structure is now split between those still orbiting Dutch and those trying to survive him. Arthur's late loyalty moves away from the leader and toward the people the leader is willing to sacrifice. The Pinkertons, especially Agent Milton and Agent Ross, represent the modern law closing around the gang. They are not noble heroes, but they are effective. Milton offers deals, applies pressure, tracks the gang, and understands that Dutch's world is ending. Arthur hates them, but he also learns that Dutch cannot simply outrun them with speeches. The Pinkertons are the machinery of the new century, private lawmen serving capital and order. Against them, Dutch's outlaw romance looks increasingly outdated. Leviticus Cornwall is another face of the modern world. He is wealthy, ruthless, and protected by systems larger than himself. Dutch frames men like Cornwall as tyrants, and he is not entirely wrong. Cornwall represents money-shaping law, railroads, oil, and political power. But Dutch's hatred of Cornwall becomes tangled with ego and theatrics. Killing Cornwall does not save the gang. It only brings more heat. Arthur sees that Dutch's symbolic victories are becoming practical disasters. Arthur's final meeting with Mary Linton is one of the last glimpses of the life he did not choose. Mary asks him to run away with her, or at least the possibility hovers painfully between them. Arthur cannot. By then he is sick, loyal to people still trapped in the gang, and aware that his past has not disappeared. Their goodbye at the station is heartbreaking because both know the truth. Love remains, but life has moved beyond repair. Mary is not the answer anymore, not because she never mattered, but because Arthur has become someone whose last duty lies elsewhere. The Brother Dawkins and Sister Calderon encounters give Arthur another path of reflection. Through them, especially in a high honour path, Arthur speaks more openly about fear, illness, and the possibility that his life has been wasted. Sister Calderon's conversation with him at the train station is one of the most important spiritual moments in the game. She does not absolve him cheaply, she listens. Arthur admits he is afraid. For a man like Arthur, that confession is enormous. It is one of the few times he drops the performance completely. Sister Calderon tells Arthur that there is nothing to be afraid of, in the sense that he still has a chance to do good with the time left. The power of the seen is not religious doctrine alone, it is the gift of being seen without being used. Dutch sees Arthur as loyalty, Strauss sees him as enforcement, the law sees him as criminal, Sister Calderon sees a frightened, dying man who can still choose kindness. That kind of recognition helps Arthur step fully into his final acts. Charlotte Balfour is another late-game figure who reveals Arthur's goodness. She's a widow trying to survive in the wilderness after her husband dies, and Arthur teaches her to hunt, shoot, and live. These missions are quiet, optional, and deeply important. Arthur helps Charlotte not for money, not for strategy, not because Dutch orders him, but because she needs help and he can give it. With Charlotte, Arthur becomes a teacher rather than an enforcer. He gives survival skills instead of taking payment. Charlotte also shows Arthur what a different legacy can look like. He cannot undo the lives he has destroyed, but he can leave someone stronger than he found her. He can help a widow live. He can speak gently. He can be remembered not as the man who came to collect, but as the man who taught someone how to survive winter. These small acts matter because Arthur's redemption is not only in the final mountain scene, it is scattered through late choices where he stops taking and starts giving. Hamish Sinclair, the one-legged veteran, offers Arthur a different kind of companionship. Their hunting and fishing trips are peaceful, humorous, and touched by mortality. Hamish is not part of the gang's drama. He meets Arthur as a man outdoors, sharing stories, danger, and sport. Their friendship gives Arthur a taste of ordinary male companionship, not built around robbery or hierarchy. When Hamish dies, it is another reminder that peace is fragile, but the time with him still matters. Arthur's horse is also part of his lore, even though the exact horse can vary. He speaks to his horse, cares for it, brushes it, feeds it, calms it, and depends on it. The bond matters most in the final escape, when the horse dies and Arthur thanks it. That thank you is one of the most devastating small moments in the story. Arthur, who struggles to speak tenderness to people, gives honest gratitude to the animal that carried him through the last road. It is simple, and it breaks the heart because it is so pure. As Beaver Hollow deteriorates, Micah's role becomes impossible to ignore. He encourages Dutch's paranoia, isolates him from doubters, and feeds the idea that loyalty means obedience to whatever Dutch wants in the moment. Arthur sees Micah as the disease inside the gang, but Micah only succeeds because Dutch allows him to. That is the hardest truth. Micah may be the rat, the manipulator, and the final poison, but Dutch's need to be worshipped creates the opening. Arthur's anger at Micah is justified, but his grief over Dutch is deeper. Molly's false confession and death, Grimshaw's later death, and the general suspicion inside camp all show the family turning into a courtroom without justice. People are judged by panic, rumour and proximity to power. Susan Grimshaw, who once enforced camp discipline with harsh loyalty, is shot by Micah when she sides with Arthur. Her death marks the collapse of the old camp order. The people who held the gang together are being killed, ignored, or driven away. Agent Milton's revelation that Micah has been informing since after Guarma is the final confirmation of Arthur's instincts. But the timing is important. Micah did not cause every bad decision. Dutch was failing before Guarma. The gang's violence, arrogance, and refusal to change were already destroying it. Micah accelerates the collapse and steers Dutch into darker choices. But he is not the only reason the dream dies. Arthur's final clarity is mature because he sees both. Micah is a traitor, and Dutch has become a man willing to believe the traitor over his own sons. Arthur's rescue of Abigail from Milton is one of his last heroic acts. Milton reveals the truth. Abigail kills him with Sadie's help, and Arthur returns to camp knowing the gang's final confrontation is coming. He is sick, exhausted, and almost out of time, but he still rides back because John and his family need a chance. The old Arthur might have returned to defend Dutch's plan. The late Arthur returns to expose Micah and get people out. The final confrontation at Beaver Hollow is painful because Arthur is telling the truth and still cannot make Dutch hear it. He says Micah is the rat. Susan Grimshaw believed him. John appears, alive, despite Dutch suggesting he was lost. The camp splits in seconds. Guns are drawn. Years of family collapse into one terrible standoff. Arthur has reached the point where truth is clear, but clarity does not guarantee victory. Some people choose denial because the truth would destroy the story they need to keep living. Arthur's final choice, to help John escape or go back for the money, defines the moral shape of his ending. The high honour path of helping John is the clearest expression of his redemption. Money once drove so much of the gang's suffering. Scores, debts, robberies, plans, and the Blackwater stash. Arthur choosing John over money is Arthur rejecting the false promise that one more haul can fix a rotten life. He chooses a person, a family, a future beyond himself. The escape with John is physically brutal. Arthur is coughing, stumbling, fighting, and using the last of his strength to keep John moving. He gives John his hat, a small object that becomes a symbol of inheritance. The hat is not just clothing, it is Arthur passing on protection, memory, and responsibility. John will later wear that legacy into his own story, but in the moment, it is simply a dying man giving his brother what he can. Arthur telling John to go and not look back is the emotional completion of their relationship. At the beginning, Arthur resents John for leaving. At the end, Arthur begs him to leave properly. The difference is everything. Arthur has come to understand that escape is not betrayal when staying means death and corruption. John has a wife and child. Arthur had a son who died. That old wound becomes late wisdom. He cannot save Isaac, but he can help Jack keep his father. The final fight with Micah on the mountain is not glorious in the usual sense. Arthur is too sick for glory. The fight is muddy, desperate, and exhausted. Micah is vicious and healthy enough to win physically, while Arthur is running on will, rage, and the last sparks of strength. Dutch appears, and Arthur uses his final words not to beg for life, but to tell Dutch that he gave him everything. That line contains decades. The boy Dutch found, the man Dutch used, and the dying son Dutch abandoned. Dutch walking away from Arthur and Micah is ambiguous and devastating. He does not save Arthur. He does not fully side with Micah in that moment either. He simply leaves. For Arthur, that may be the final proof of who Dutch has become. A man who cannot face the truth, cannot admit fault, and cannot stay with the dying son who gave him his life. Dutch's silence is worse than a speech. It is the absence where love should have been. Arthur's death changes depending on honour and final choices, but the high honour sunrise death is the most thematically complete. Arthur crawls to a place where he can see the morning, breathes his last and dies facing light. The tuberculosis takes him, but not before he gives John a chance. He does not die innocent. He dies changed. That distinction is essential. Redemption does not mean Arthur becomes pure. It means his final direction is different from his past direction. He uses the end of his life to protect rather than take. The deer and wolf imagery tied to honour deepens Arthur's spiritual arc. A high honour Arthur is associated with a deer, calm, watchful, and touched by light. A low honour Arthur is associated with a wolf, hungry, lonely, and darker. These animals are not literal judgments from the world in a simple way. They are symbolic reflections of the path Arthur walks. The deer ending feels peaceful because Arthur has turned toward mercy. The wolf ending feels harsher because the life remains more trapped in violence. Arthur's low honour endings are still part of his lore because they show what he could become if he refuses reflection. If he goes back for money or lives with cruelty, his death is uglier, darker and more empty. Micah may kill him directly, or he may die without the same sense of release. These endings matter because they prove redemption is not automatic. Tuberculosis gives Arthur urgency, but not guaranteed grace. He still has to choose. The epilogue belongs to John, but Arthur's presence remains everywhere. John, Abigail, Jack and Sadie survive partly because Arthur spent himself to make it possible. John builds a ranch at Beecher's Hope, tries to become a husband and father, and carries Arthur's memory forward whether he says it often or not. The world after Arthur is not fixed, but it exists because Arthur gave someone else a chance to keep moving. Arthur's grave changes depending on honour. A high honour grave is placed in a beautiful spot and marked with the words, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." A low honour grave is more neglected. This difference is one of the game's quiet ways of letting the world remember Arthur according to how he lived near the end. The grave is not only a marker, it is a final tone. The man is gone, but the shape of his last choices remains. Charles Smith's care for Arthur's body matters deeply. Charles is one of the gang's most morally grounded members, and his respect for Arthur gives the burial emotional weight. Arthur does not vanish like an animal in the mountains. Someone who understood his worth makes sure he has a grave. That act is a final kindness from the gang's better side. Even after the family breaks, a fragment of love remains. Mary Linton visiting Arthur's grave is another quiet confirmation that the man she loved never fully disappeared. She mourns not only what Arthur was, but what he might have been. Her presence at the grave is almost unbearably sad because their story never became a life. She could not save him, and he could not choose her in time, but she remembers. In a world where outlaws are often reduced to wanted posters and corpses, being remembered with love matters. John's revenge against Micah years later is emotionally connected to Arthur, but it is also tragic because it begins the chain that leads the lore back to John. In 1907, John, Sadie and Charles track Micah to Mount Hagen. Dutch appears there as well, older and hollowed by time. John kills Micah after Dutch shoots him, and the Blackwater money is recovered. On the surface, Arthur is avenged. Underneath, revenge reopens the trail that Edgar Ross will eventually follow. Arthur saved John's life, but the old outlaw pattern still reaches forward. This is why Arthur's redemption is powerful but not magical. He does not end violence forever. He does not save John from the events of Red Dead Redemption. He does not destroy the systems that crush the gang. He does not bring back Isaac, Eliza, Hosea, Lenny, Sean, Kieran, Molly, Grimshaw, Eagle Flies or all the others. What he does is smaller and more human. He changes the direction of his last acts. He gives John time. He helps some people. He dies with clearer eyes than he lived. Arthur's lore is also the story of a man learning to separate loyalty from love. For most of his life, he thinks loyalty means staying, obeying, and doing the work. Dutch benefits from that belief. The gang depends on it. But late in the story, Arthur learns that real love sometimes means disobeying the person who demands loyalty. Helping John against Dutch's wishes is not betrayal of the gang's best meaning. It is loyalty to what the gang was supposed to be before Dutch's ego hollowed it out. Arthur's relationship with violence is complicated because he is genuinely good at it. He can intimidate, shoot, brawl, rob and kill with terrifying competence. The story never pretends he is harmless, but it also shows that skill at violence does not mean comfort with meaninglessness. Arthur can do terrible things and still be disturbed by cruelty without purpose. This is why Micah disgusts him. Micah enjoys the part of outlaw life that Arthur has learned to treat as work. Arthur's soul is damaged but not dead. Arthur's humour is another essential part of his lore. He is dry, sarcastic, blunt, and often very funny. That humour keeps him human. Without it, he could become only tragic muscle. With it, he becomes a man who knows the absurdity of his world, who can mock himself, tease friends, and survive discomfort through wit. His jokes often hide tenderness, but they also reveal intelligence. Arthur is not polished, but he is perceptive. He sees through foolishness quickly, except when love and loyalty blind him. His art gives him another dimension. The sketches in his journal show patience, sensitivity, and attention to form. He draws animals, plants, buildings, people, and strange encounters with care. A man who only knew destruction would not look at the world that way. Arthur's drawings are proof that he has always had another self inside him, a self capable of contemplation, beauty, and quiet record. The tragedy is that this self survives in margins while the outlaw life occupies the centre. Arthur's voice is also part of why his lore feels so intimate. He speaks roughly, but there is warmth under the gravel. He can sound amused, irritated, exhausted, gentle, or ashamed with small shifts. The way he says goodbye, the way he talks to his horse, the way he admits fear, and the way he says he tried in the end all carry the weight of a man whose emotional vocabulary has been limited by life but not erased. He does not speak beautifully in a literary way. He speaks truthfully when he finally has to. The phrase I gave you, "all I had," is the centre of Arthur's tragedy with Dutch. It is not only about the final mission. Arthur did give Dutch everything: youth, strength, loyalty, violence, belief, patience, and forgiveness, far beyond what Dutch deserved. In the end, Dutch cannot answer because the truth is too large. Arthur's whole life has been spent funding another man's dream, and the dream cannot even hold him as he dies. That is the deepest betrayal. Yet Arthur's final words and actions are not only accusation, they are release. By sending John away, by naming Micah, by confronting Dutch, Arthur stops living inside the lie. The lie says Dutch has a plan. The lie says loyalty means obedience. The lie says money will save them. The lie says one more score will make the past worth it. Arthur dies outside that lie. For the first time, he sees the dream clearly and chooses a real person over it. Arthur's camp life deserves more attention because much of his lore is not spoken in missions at all. It is found in the way he moves through camp, the way people call to him, the way he answers, the way he drops supplies into the donation box, the way he sits by the fire and listens more than he admits. In the gang, Arthur is not only a shooter, he's one of the people who makes the camp function. He hunts, contributes money, brings in medicine, helps with problems, and acts as the rough wall between vulnerable people and the outside world. That ordinary labour is part of why the gang's collapse hurts. It was not only a gang of robbers, it was a daily life, and Arthur helped hold that daily life together. The camp ledger is a quiet symbol of Arthur's responsibility. It records donations, purchases, upgrades, and the shared economy of the group. Dutch talks about freedom and Tahiti, but the camp survives through food, medicine, ammunition, lodging, and people bringing in what they can. Arthur's name appears often because he is one of the main providers. This practical record says something speeches cannot. Dreams may inspire a gang, but beans, bullets, blankets, and medicine keep it alive. Arthur lives in that gap between Dutch's grand vision and the camp's material needs. Pearson's role in camp also reveals Arthur's place. Pearson is the cook, butcher and supply man, a former naval man whose stories are often larger than life. Arthur brings in meat and supplies, and those simple interactions show a domestic side of outlaw life. A deer on horseback becomes stew, a fish becomes supper, a camp that robs trains still needs coffee and meat. Arthur's hunting is therefore not only a hobby or survival skill, it is care translated into food. When he brings back an animal, he is feeding people who may never thank him properly. Susan Grimshaw's relationship with Arthur is stern, familiar, and almost familial. She's harsh with many members of the gang, especially the women, and she keeps order with a sharp tongue and a harder hand. But she also understands what the camp requires. Arthur respects her because she works. She's not decorative, and she's not foolish. In the final confrontation, when Grimshaw sides with Arthur against Micah, it matters because she represents the old gang's discipline choosing truth over poison. Her death marks more than another body falling. It marks the old camp order being shot down. Tilly Jackson is one of the people Arthur can protect in quieter ways. She was once tied to the Foreman brothers, another violent group, and the gang gives her a form of refuge. Arthur helps when her past catches up to her, and his treatment of Tilly shows that he can be protective without being possessive. He does not make speeches about saving her. He simply handles danger when danger arrives. Tilly's eventual survival and later respectable life are part of the small proof that not everyone in the gang is doomed. Arthur's world collapses, but some people he cared about make it out. Mary Beth Gaskell gives Arthur another kind of softness. She's romantic, imaginative, fond of stories, and more gentle than the life around her. Arthur sometimes teases her, but there is warmth in it. Mary Beth's later life as a writer fits her beautifully, and it quietly answers the gang's tragedy with survival through imagination. Arthur's conversations with her show that he can speak to dreamers without crushing them. He may not believe in pretty stories for himself, but he does not hate the part of other people that needs them. Karen Jones is one of the saddest camp figures because her decline happens gradually and without a clean rescue. She's bold, funny, capable, and part of the Valentine Bank job, but as the gang worsens, her drinking deepens and her future becomes uncertain. Arthur can see that she is in trouble, but he cannot save everyone. Karen's disappearance after the gang's fall is one of the lingering sorrows of the story. Not every member gets a grave, a farewell, or a clear ending. Some simply fade into the ruin. Reverend Swanson's arc is small but meaningful beside Arthur's. At first, Swanson is a mess of addiction, guilt, and spiritual collapse. Arthur rescues him from danger near the train tracks, annoyed but caring in his usual rough way. Later, Swanson can leave the gang and begin recovering his life. In some paths, he speaks with Arthur at the train station instead of Sister Calderon. His presence matters because he is another fallen man trying to climb out. Arthur may not share his faith, but he understands shame. Swanson's survival suggests that broken people sometimes do get another chapter. Josiah Trelawney represents the more theatrical side of outlaw life. He comes and goes, full of charms, schemes, disguises, and elegant danger. Arthur finds him irritating and useful in equal measure. Trelawney's ability to move between respectable society and criminal life contrasts with Arthur's bluntness. Arthur cannot become invisible in polite rooms the way Trelawney can. He carries the outlaw life in his body. Trelawney can perform normalcy. Arthur can only briefly imitate it before the truth shows through. Kieran Duffy's story is one of the best ways the gang's moral boundaries become complicated. He begins as an O'Driscoll prisoner, terrified and despised by almost everyone. Arthur threatens him, mocks him, and treats him as an enemy by category. But Kieran helps save Arthur during the attack on 6 Point Cabin, and slowly becomes part of camp life. He tends horses, speaks nervously, and tries to belong. His presence proves that enemies are sometimes just frightened people wearing the wrong name. Kieran's death is horrifying because it punishes that fragile belonging. The O'Driscolls capture him, torture him, kill him, and send his body back as a message. It is one of the most gruesome moments in the story, and it matters because Kieran had nearly become family. Arthur's reaction carries shock and anger, but also the deeper discomfort of knowing how easily labels can kill. The gang once saw Kieran as disposable because he was an O'Driscoll. Then they mourn him because he became Kieran. That difference is the moral point. Charles Smith is one of Arthur's strongest moral mirrors. Charles is calm, capable and dangerous, but his violence usually has clearer limits. He hunts only what is needed, respects animals, sees through cruelty, and does not romanticize pointless killing. Arthur respects Charles because Charles has strength without theatrical ego. When they discover men killing buffalo for sport and profit, Charles's anger is controlled but deep. Arthur sees in him a kind of grounded honour that does not depend on Dutch's speeches. Arthur and Charles share a practical kindness. They can ride together without needing too many words. Charles helps rescue people, tracks carefully, fights fiercely, and later helps bury Arthur. Their friendship is not built on jokes or nostalgia as much as trust. Charles sees Arthur's decline and understands more than he says. After Arthur dies, Charles's choice to return and give him a proper burial is one of the most loving acts in the entire story. It is quiet, respectful, and exactly the kind of dignity Arthur would never ask for himself. Javier Escuela's relationship with Arthur is tragic because early Javier is warm, musical, loyal, and brave. He helps search for John in the snow. He sings around camp. He seems like one of Dutch's truest believers, but not a monster. That is what makes his later alignment with Dutch and Micah painful. Javier does not become evil overnight. He clings to the structure that gave him belonging, even as that structure rots. Arthur watches another brother choose loyalty to Dutch over loyalty to truth. Bill Williamson is rougher, insecure, often foolish, and hungry for respect. Arthur mocks him often, sometimes cruelly, but Bill's loyalty to Dutch is also part of his need to feel valued. In the gang, Bill has a place. Outside it, he's another violent man with limited prospects. His later fall into the events known from Red Dead Redemption is already visible in 1899. Arthur may not admire Bill, but Bill's decline is still part of the gang's tragedy. Men who needed structure followed Dutch until the structure became poison. Uncle is easy to dismiss as comic relief, lazy, drunk, and full of excuses, especially with his famous complaints about lumbago. But Arthur's relationship with Uncle shows another side of camp life. Arthur insults him, Uncle needles him, and the two move through a rhythm of irritation that is almost affectionate. Uncle contributes little in the practical sense, yet he is part of the camp's texture. A family is not only made of useful people. Sometimes it includes the old nuisance by the fire, who somehow remains loved despite himself. Jack Marston is one of the purest measures of the gang's morality. Around Jack, the gang pretends most strongly that it is a family rather than a criminal enterprise. Arthur is awkward but kind with him. The fishing trip with Jack is gentle, because Arthur does not know exactly how to speak to a child, but he tries. He shows patience, answers questions, and lets the boy exist in a world briefly free from gunfire. Because Arthur lost Isaac, these scenes carry unspoken grief. He is not only entertaining John and Abigail's son, he is touching the edge of fatherhood he was denied. Kane, the camp dog, also reveals the gang's emotional weather. When the dog's around, camp feels more alive and domestic. When Kane disappears and Jack worries, There are dark hints that Micah may have killed him. Whether spoken directly or left in implication, the detail matters because cruelty to a harmless animal shows what kind of man Micah is. Arthur's world includes plenty of violence, but not all violence is equal. Hurting the defenceless for amusement is the kind of rot Arthur recognises instinctively. Arthur's encounters with animals outside camp reveal his capacity for attention. He can study tracks, calm horses, skin game efficiently, and observe species in his journal. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is full of animals, not only because the frontier needs life, but because Arthur is the kind of man who notices them. He may not use academic language, but he understands behaviour. He knows where animals move, how weather affects them, and how patience matters. That gives him a bond with the land that Dutch, increasingly, only speaks about in abstraction. Albert Mason, the wildlife photographer, brings out one of Arthur's funniest and gentlest recurring sides. Mason is enthusiastic, naive, and constantly in danger because he wants to photograph wild animals he does not fully understand. Arthur keeps saving him while acting annoyed. The missions are charming because Arthur becomes a reluctant guardian of someone whose passion is harmless and impractical. Mason sees beauty, Arthur sees danger. Together they create a small friendship based on the gap between wonder and common sense. The Mason encounters also show Arthur helping preserve images rather than taking trophies. In a story where animals are often hunted, skinned, sold or eaten, photography offers another relationship to nature. Arthur may not become an artist of wildlife in Mason's way, but he respects the man's sincerity enough to keep helping. There is something lovely about Arthur, a dying outlaw, protecting a fool with a camera because the fool wants the world to be remembered beautifully. The stranger mission with Charlotte Balfour is not the only place Arthur teaches survival. Across the world he can help people trapped by snakebite, bear traps, roadside danger, or foolish mistakes. These chance encounters matter because they reveal Arthur's morality outside the gang's commands. Nobody's watching. Dutch will not praise him. The ledger will not record it. If Arthur helps, it is because some part of him responds to need before cynicism can stop him. Those small roadside mercies build the emotional truth of his later redemption. Arthur can also rob, threaten and kill strangers in the open world. That possibility matters because it keeps his morality unstable. He is not written as goodness trapped in bad circumstances alone. He is capable of choosing worse, and the world allows that darker Arthur to exist. The high honour story is powerful because it feels chosen against a life of easier brutality. Arthur's best self is not automatic. It is fought for, especially late. The Aberdeen pig farm encounter, if Arthur crosses it, is one of the most grotesque side stories in his world. The Aberdeens are a disturbing sibling pair who drug and rob travellers, and their home reveals layers of decay, violence, and hidden horror. Arthur can become their victim and then return to recover what was taken. The encounter matters less as a main plot point and more as atmosphere. It shows that the world outside the gang is not morally clean. Civilization, farms, parlours and family homes can hide monsters too. These serial killer clues scattered across the world create another kind of darkness. Arthur can find horrific murder scenes and eventually track the killer. These encounters remind us that the world of 1899 is full of violence beyond outlaw politics. The gang is not the only source of evil. Some people kill without ideology, without loyalty, without need, and without even Micah's opportunism. Arthur exists in a world where law, crime, madness, poverty and cruelty all overlap. The vampire of St. Denis, if discovered, adds a gothic edge to Arthur's world. Whether treated as literal supernatural horror or local urban legend made flesh, the encounter shows how different St. Denis is from the open frontier. The city contains alleys, symbols, murders, and secrets layered over modern streets. Arthur is a practical man, but his world is full of strange things at the margins. These oddities make his journal even more important, because he records the unbelievable with the same hand that sketches birds and barns. Arthur's interactions with the inventor Marko Dragic bring science fiction strangeness into the Western world. Dragic's experiments with electricity, remote control, and artificial life show a future even stranger than St. Denis. Arthur often reacts with skeptical amusement, but the missions matter because they place him near the edge of modern invention. The world is not only moving from horses to trains, it is moving toward machines that seem almost magical. Arthur belongs to an age being overtaken from several directions at once. The electric chair mission with Professor Bell and the execution of a criminal named Wilson J. McDaniels shows another ugly face of progress. Science, punishment, spectacle, and commerce mix together. Arthur helps bring in a man for execution, and the event becomes grotesque rather than noble. The mission fits the game's larger view of modernity. New technology does not automatically mean moral improvement. A more advanced society can still be cruel, just with better equipment. The veteran Hamish, the widow Charlotte, the photographer Mason, the monk and sister in St. Denis, the Downs family, and Rains Fall, all form a loose circle around late Arthur. They are not gang members, and that is the point. They show Arthur relating to people beyond Dutch's world. Some need protection, some offer wisdom, some offer friendship, some confront him with guilt. Together they widen his moral field. Arthur begins as a man whose loyalty is concentrated inside the gang. Near the end, his conscience expands beyond it. Arthur's literacy and intelligence are often understated. He may speak roughly, but he reads letters, writes fluently, keeps a detailed journal, understands scams, judges people quickly, and notices when plans make no sense. Dutch uses fancy language to impress people, but Arthur's intelligence is more grounded. He may not decorate his thoughts with philosophy, yet he often sees the practical truth sooner than those who sound smarter. This contrast becomes sharper as Dutch's speeches grow more detached from reality. Dutch taught Arthur to read the world through a story. The gang is free, the law is corrupt, civilization as poison, loyalty as sacred, money as a temporary means to escape, and Dutch himself as the keeper of the plan. Arthur's late arc is partly the painful process of reading the world without Dutch's narration. He has to look directly at facts Dutch keeps explaining away. People are dead. Plans keep failing. Micah is dangerous. John was abandoned. The money does not save them. The dream has become an excuse. Hosea's death makes this process harder because Hosea might have helped Arthur name the truth sooner. Hosea understands Dutch's vanity, but loves him anyway, and that combination gives him influence. Without Hosea, Arthur has fewer safe places to take his doubt. He talks with Charles, Sadie, John, and sometimes outsiders, but none can replace the old mentor. That absence is part of why Beaver Hollow feels so spiritually empty. The man who could laugh at Dutch and still steady him is gone. Arthur's body language changes across the story in ways that add to his lore. Early Arthur stands broad, strong and loose, comfortable in his physical power. Later he coughs, bends, pauses and looks worn down. He becomes thinner, paler and more visibly tired. This is not only a health detail, it changes how every scene feels. A man who used to dominate rooms physically now has to rely on will. The body that carried Dutch's dream is collapsing before Dutch admits the dream has failed. The tuberculosis itself connects Arthur to the era. In the late 19th century, consumption was feared common, and often fatal. It carried social stigma and a slow, wasting horror. Arthur's death is not quick like a bullet. It is intimate and humiliating. He coughs blood. He weakens. He's forced to feel mortality in every breath. For an outlaw used to danger arriving from outside, tuberculosis is a different enemy. It cannot be shot, outrun, or intimidated. Arthur's fear after the diagnosis is one of his most human traits. He does not become serene all at once. He is angry, shaken, ashamed, and frightened. When he admits fear to Sister Calderon, the confession lands because it breaks his whole lifelong posture. Arthur has faced guns, wolves, Pinkertons, and prison breaks, but death by sickness strips him of the fantasy that courage means not being afraid. Real courage, by the end, means being afraid and still choosing well. The honour system, though it can vary, reflects Arthur's internal direction rather than a simple saint or sinner meter. High honour does not erase the robberies, killings, or debt collection. Low honour does not erase every tenderness that might still exist. But honour colours the final meaning of his life. It asks whether Arthur's last chapter bends toward mercy or bitterness. The same dying man can face the sunrise or sink into darkness, depending on the choices made along the way. Arthur's dreams and animal visions are part of this moral atmosphere. The deer and wolf appear in quiet, almost spiritual flashes. The deer is not weak. It is alert, graceful, and peaceful. The wolf is not simply evil. It is lonely, hungry, and harsh. These images do not lecture Arthur. They reflect him. They give shape to the path his soul is taking when words would be too blunt. In a world full of guns and mud, the visions let the story speak softly. The way Arthur treats debtors late in the game can change dramatically. He may forgive debts, give money, or refuse to continue Strauss's work. These acts are small compared with bank robberies and shootouts, but morally they are enormous. Arthur's illness begins with a debt collection, and his redemption includes rejecting debt collection as a way of life. The circle is clear without being neat. He cannot undo Thomas Downes, but he can stop being the man who makes more Thomas Downeses. Archie Downes is important because he is near the age Isaac might have been if he had lived. Arthur's help for Archie is therefore layered with guilt and lost fatherhood. He sees a young man being crushed by poverty and shame after Arthur helped push the family into ruin. Helping Archie find a way out is not only charity, it is Arthur facing the kind of future his violence once destroyed. Again, the repair is incomplete, but incomplete repair is not worthless. Edith Downes's bitterness toward Arthur is justified, and the story is wise enough not to make her instantly grateful. She has every reason to hate him. Arthur's late help does not entitle him to forgiveness. This is part of what makes the redemption honest. He can do better without demanding that victims comfort him. The goal is not to feel clean. The goal is to stop adding harm where help is still possible. Arthur's final relationship with money changes because money loses its spell. Dutch keeps chasing it as if the next pile will turn the gang's sins into freedom. Arthur comes to understand that money without moral direction is only another excuse to keep running. This is why the choice to help John instead of returning for the money matters so much. Arthur is not only rejecting greed, he is rejecting Dutch's entire theology of the next score. The Blackwater money hangs over the story like a ghost. It is the lost treasure that could supposedly solve everything, but it is also the symbol of a disaster nobody can fully speak about. Dutch keeps making plans to replace it, recover it, or outdo it. The gang keeps suffering under its absence. Arthur spends most of the story working toward money that never delivers peace. By the end, he sees that the life built around that promise is hollow. Micah's interest in the Blackwater money reveals his nature. He does not care about the gang as family. He cares about advantage, survival, and profit. He reads Dutch's ego and feeds it because Dutch is useful. Arthur's anger at Micah is not only personal hatred, it is the disgust of someone who still believed in a corrupted family watching a man exploit that corruption openly. Micah is what outlaw freedom looks like without love. Dutch's tragedy, as Arthur experiences it, is not that Dutch becomes a different man overnight. It is that the man Arthur loved and the man Dutch becomes were always connected. Dutch could be generous, inspiring, and brave. He could also be vain, manipulative, and addicted to being adored. Arthur's final pain comes from realising that love made him excuse the second half for too long. Dutch did not need to stop being intelligent to become dangerous. He only needed to love his own myth more than the people who trusted him. Arthur's view of John also changes because John begins to do what Arthur could not do earlier. Choose family over the gang. John is imperfect. He's slow to mature, often foolish, and still tied to violence. But he loves Abigail and Jack enough eventually to try. Arthur recognises that effort and decides it is worth protecting. He is not saving a perfect man. He is saving a possible father. That is more moving because Arthur knows possible fathers can fail. Abigail's strength lies in her refusal to be seduced by Dutch's speeches. She has seen enough of men's dreams. She wants safety for Jack, and that makes her more clear-eyed than many gunmen in camp. Arthur may sometimes speak roughly to her, but he increasingly respects her because she sees the truth of priorities. A child matters more than a plan. A husband should come home. A family should not be sacrificed to one more robbery. Jack's future is the most fragile thing Arthur protects. Jack is young enough to see the gang as strange uncles and aunt-like figures, not as the doomed criminal structure it is. He reads, plays, asks questions, and absorbs more than adults realise. Arthur's final gift to John is also a gift to Jack. The possibility of a childhood beyond camps, gunfire, and Dutch's collapsing dream. The tragedy of the wider Red Dead saga is that this escape will not last forever, but Arthur's act still gives Jack years he might not have had. The quieter lore around Arthur lives in the hours between robberies. Camp is not only a resting place, it is the place where people ask for coffee, complain about stew, mend clothes, sing badly, sharpen knives, donate coins, and try to believe they are a family. Arthur moves through that space as the man who can lift a hay bale, carry a sack, drag in a deer, or ride out for medicine without needing praise. His usefulness is ordinary there, almost domestic. That matters because it shows the shape of his life before the Great Collapse. He has been trained to think love means service. The camp ledger gives that service a physical form. Arthur can bring in money, food, pelts, jewellery, medicine, and stolen trinkets, and the camp turns those offerings into ammunition, blankets, better provisions, and a little more comfort. Dutch speaks of grand freedom, but the ledger tells a smaller truth. People need coffee, bullets, meat, soap, and time. Arthur understands that level of life better than Dutch does. He may mock chores, but he knows that survival is made from unglamorous acts repeated every day. Pearson's wagon belongs to that practical heart of the gang. The old sailor talks, cooks, boasts, complains, and somehow becomes one of the keepers of routine. Arthur's hunting does not feel noble when it is happening. It is work. He rides out, tracks an animal, skins it, loads the meat, and brings it back so others can eat. Inside the larger story, that work quietly pushes against the idea that Arthur is only destruction. He has spent years killing men, yet he also knows how to feed a camp. Susan Grimshaw gives the camp another kind of order. She can be harsh, sharp, and sometimes cruel, but her discipline keeps the place from collapsing into filth and despair long before Dutch's speeches stop working. Arthur respects her because she is not ornamental. She has survived in the same hard world and learned to keep moving. Their relationship has the flavour of old arguments that no longer need introduction. They both know the gang is held together by people who do the dull work while Dutch performs the dream. Uncle, by contrast, survives through laziness, jokes and impossible excuses. Arthur insults him constantly, and Uncle often earns it, but their exchanges reveal something warmer under the surface. The gang needs its useless people too, because a family made only of fighters would become unbearable. Uncle's laziness irritates Arthur, because Arthur cannot imagine being loved while doing so little. That annoyance says as much about Arthur as it does about Uncle. Arthur has been useful for so long that rest almost looks like a moral failure. Josiah Trelawney drifts in and out like a man who belongs everywhere and nowhere. He has polish, theatre, secrets, and a life beyond the camp that most members do not fully understand. Arthur treats him with suspicion and weary affection, which fits Trelawney's role perfectly. He reminds Arthur that identity can be performed. A man can wear a suit, tell a story, vanish into a city and return with a new scheme. Arthur is more blunt than that, but he is not immune to performance. He's been performing toughness his whole life. Reverend Swanson offers a sadder mirror. Addiction has hollowed him out, and Arthur often handles him with impatience, embarrassment, or reluctant care. Pulling Swanson from danger is not glamorous. It is messy, irritating, and almost thankless. But it shows the way Arthur still responds when someone helpless might be lost. He does not need to admire a man to save him. That kind of mercy is rough, and sometimes half angry, but it is mercy all the same. Kieran Duffy's place in Arthur's story is easy to underestimate. At first, Kieran is an O'Driscoll prisoner, tied to a tree and treated as a tool. Arthur threatens him, mocks him, and nearly sees him as less than a person because the feud has already assigned him a category. Then Kieran saves Arthur's life during the attack on 6 Point Cabin. The label weakens. A captured enemy becomes a nervous young man who likes horses, fears Column, and wants somewhere safer to belong. The fishing trip with Kieran has a softness that the main feud almost hides. Arthur does not suddenly become tender, but he lets Kieran exist beside him without constant cruelty. They fish, talk, and move through a small piece of ordinary time. That smallness is the point. Kieran's later death is horrifying because the story has taken the trouble to make him human first. His mutilated body riding back into camp is not only a threat from the O'Driscolls, it is the murder of a possibility. That even someone from the enemy side might have found a fragile home. Sean Maguire brings another kind of energy into Arthur's life. He is loud, vain, funny, reckless, and almost painfully young beneath all the boasting. Arthur acts annoyed by him, but Sean's rescue and return give the camp a burst of life at Horseshoe Overlook. That party matters because it shows the gang before the last rot sets in. People sing, drink, flirt, argue, and forget the law for a while. When Sean dies suddenly in Rhodes, the shock lands hard because his noise had made the camp feel alive. Karen Jones carries part of that early liveliness too. She is bold, wounded, sharp-tongued, and capable of playing a role when a job requires it. Her decline after Sean's death is one of the quieter losses in the camp. Arthur sees pieces of it, but he cannot fix it. That inability is important. He can shoot, rob, ride, threaten, and rescue. But grief inside another person is beyond his skill. Karen fades into drink and distance, and the gang has no language strong enough to bring her back. Mary Beth Gaskill gives Arthur gentler conversations. She reads, writes, and notices feelings that other people try to bury. With her, Arthur sometimes sounds less guarded, as though he recognises a mind that can imagine another life. Mary Beth is not naive. She has survived by stealing and charming when necessary, but but she keeps a romantic imagination alive inside a brutal camp. Arthur's kindness toward her shows the part of him that respects softness, even when he does not know how to live inside it. Tilly Jackson's history with the Foreman brothers reveals another layer of the gang's purpose. For Tilly, Dutch's family was once a refuge from men who wanted to control and punish her. Arthur helping her is not only another rescue, it shows that the gang has truly protected people, not just exploited them. That makes the later collapse more painful. Dutch's dream was never entirely fake. Some people really did find shelter under it, and Arthur knows that because he helped hold that shelter up. Javier Escuella's early warmth makes his later distance hurt more. He sings by the fire, believes in loyalty, and carries his own past of revolution, exile, and survival. Arthur and Javier can seem like brothers in the early chapters, joined by music, robberies, and shared danger. By the end, Javier's loyalty bends toward Dutch, even when the moral ground is cracking. The tragedy is not that Javier was always false, it is that loyalty without clear sight can carry a decent man into the wrong corner. Bill Williamson is rougher, cruder, and easier for Arthur to mock, but he also belongs to the old family. He is insecure, often foolish, and desperate to be respected by men who rarely give him that respect. Arthur's impatience with Bill can be funny, yet it also reveals the hierarchy inside the camp. Some men are loved but not taken seriously. Bill's later loyalty to Dutch, an eventual future as a gang leader, makes sense when seen through that hunger. He wants authority because he spent so long feeling small. Lenny Summers brings out one of Arthur's most human bonds. Lenny is young, intelligent, grieving, and sharper than many people around him understand. The famous night in Valentine is remembered for comedy, but underneath the drunken chaos is trust. Arthur lets himself be foolish with Lenny in a way he rarely does with others. Their bond does not need long speeches. It is in the laughter, the slurred names, the escape from seriousness for one brief night before the world becomes harder. Lenny's death during the St. Denis bank robbery is brutal because there is no time to honour it properly. He falls, Arthur reacts, and the escape must continue. The story refuses ceremony in that moment. That refusal is part of the pain. Lenny deserved a future with books, arguments, love, and a life not defined by running. Arthur sees that future vanish in a second. The loss becomes another weight on his growing sense that Dutch's plans keep spending the young. Charles Smith may be Arthur's clearest, moral companion. Charles does not need to perform goodness loudly. He simply behaves with steadiness. He helps when help is needed, questions cruelty when it appears, and respects the land in a way that feels older and calmer than Dutch's rhetoric. Arthur trusts him because Charles is not trying to sell him a dream. Their friendship has room for silence, which may be exactly why it feels so strong. The mission involving the slaughtered bison shows the difference between hunting for life and killing for contempt. Arthur and Charles find animals wasted, not used, and the sight disgusts them. For Arthur, who has killed plenty, that disgust draws a boundary. Violence is not all the same. Killing for food, defence or survival belongs to one world. Killing to erase, boast or desecrate belongs to another. Charles helps Arthur name that boundary without turning it into a speech. Charles later helping bury Arthur gives the friendship a final dignity. Arthur's body does not disappear into the wilderness as if he meant nothing. Someone who understood him carries that memory forward and gives him a grave. The place of the grave changes with the moral shape of Arthur's ending, but the act itself matters in every version. Charles makes sure Arthur is treated as a man, not just as an outlaw who fell on a mountain. Jack Marston opens a wound Arthur rarely discusses, a child in camp changes the meaning of everything. Jack fishes, reads stories, asks questions, and looks at the adult world with a trust it has not earned. When Arthur takes Jack fishing and the Pinkertons appear, the scene quietly joins innocence with danger. Arthur is doing something gentle, almost fatherly, when the machinery of the law steps out of the trees. The old life cannot even leave a child's afternoon untouched. Arthur's lost son Isaac lingers behind his interactions with Jack. He does not pour that grief into every conversation, but the knowledge is there. Arthur once had a child who was killed because the world around him was poor, violent, and unsafe. Jack represents the chance that another child might escape that kind of ending. This makes Arthur's final choice for John and his family feel less sudden. Part of him has been grieving a lost fatherhood for years. The fishing trip with Dutch and Hosea carries a different sadness. For a moment, the three men seem almost like the old version of themselves. Father, uncle, and son drifting on water, teasing each other, remembering easier times. Nothing about it fixes the gang situation, but it lets the story breathe with memory. Arthur's loyalty becomes easier to understand in scenes like that. Dutch is not only the monster he becomes near the end, he was also the man Arthur once laughed with on a boat. Hosea's presence keeps Arthur connected to doubt. Dutch ignites, but Hosea cools. Dutch declares, while Hosea measures. Arthur has learned from both of them, though he often resembles Hosea more than he admits. When Hosea warns that a plan is foolish, Arthur listens even if the gang moves forward anyway. After Hosea dies, Dutch loses a counterweight, and Arthur loses one of the few older voices that could question the dream without openly shattering it. Colm O'Driscoll's hanging gives Dutch and Sadie a taste of revenge, but Arthur's place in that event is more complicated. Colm deserves no great sympathy, yet watching an enemy die does not heal what the feud has taken. The O'Driscoll War has eaten years, men, attention and moral energy. Arthur understands revenge as a language the gang speaks fluently. He also begins to understand that fluency does not make it wisdom. The gunslinger stories around Jimboy Calloway and Theodore Levin reveal Arthur's uneasy place inside Western legend. Levin wants a clean story, something marketable, brave and printed. The old gunslingers are smaller, stranger, drunker, uglier and sadder than legend promised. Arthur moves among them as a man who is himself becoming the kind of figure stories will distort. He can see the lie because he lives inside the truth. Blood is messy, fame is foolish, and memory edits without mercy. Albert Mason, the nervous photographer chasing pictures of wildlife, gives Arthur another unlikely role. Arthur becomes a protector for a man whose courage is real but terribly impractical. Mason is not trying to dominate the wilderness. He is trying to look at it. Arthur's patience with him is often amused and reluctant, but the encounters allow Arthur to stand beside someone who values beauty without needing to own it. That is a rare kind of company in his world. The strange business with Margaret and the escaped animals turns Arthur into a participant in frontier absurdity. A man presents himself as a grand, exotic performer, only for Arthur to discover fraud, danger, and a final surprise that is more real than expected. These encounters work because Arthur's seriousness rubs against the ridiculous. He can be dying, guilty, and hunted, yet the world still throws odd jobs into his path. His lore is richer because it includes comedy as well as sorrow. Charles Châtenay, the scandalous artist in Saint-Denis, brings out another side of civilization. The city claims refinement, but it is full of hypocrisy, appetite, and performance. Arthur helping Châtenay escape trouble is funny on the surface, yet it also places him near a world of art, desire, and social manners that he does not pretend to master. Arthur may not belong in galleries, but he understands dishonesty when he sees it, and St. Denis is dressed in it. Deborah McGuinness and the hunt for dinosaur bones give Arthur contact with deep time. A man whose life is measured in robberies, illnesses, and sudden deaths rides through a land filled with remains older than any human argument. The bones do not care about Dutch, Pinkertons, banks, or revenge. That scale is quiet but powerful. Arthur's journal sketches can hold a fossil beside a camp argument, and somehow both belong to the same world. Jeremy Gill and the legendary fish add another small study of obsession. Gill wants fame through catches, photographs, and stories that make him appear larger than life. Arthur can help him, but the whole pursuit has a comic sadness. Men keep trying to become legends by mastering pieces of nature that are not interested in being mastered. Arthur, who has seen enough false legends, fits oddly well into that pattern. He does the work, then watches the myth inflate around someone else. Professor Marco Dragig's experiments introduce Arthur to a different kind of future, one made of electricity, machines, and lonely ambition. The inventions feel wondrous and faintly ridiculous, but they also belong to the same approaching century that is closing around the gang. Modernity is not only banks and railroads, it is laboratories, wires, artificial light, and men dreaming of creation without understanding the cost. Arthur meets that future with skepticism, curiosity, and the tired patience of a man asked to stand in a storm holding strange equipment. The Aberdeen pig farm shows the grotesque side of hospitality. Arthur can walk into a house that pretends to be friendly and discover a nightmare of greed, violation, and family corruption. The encounter is optional in the larger path of his life, but it fits his world perfectly. The frontier is not pure because it is rural. Evil can sit at a dinner table and smile. Arthur knows danger in saloons and gunfights, but this kind of danger wears a domestic face. The night folk and the swamps around Bluewater Marsh give Arthur's world a horror story edge. Lanterns vanish, bodies hang in trees, and the dark seems to move with human malice. These encounters matter because they remind us that Arthur's courage is not only social or moral. He can be frightened. He can enter places where his usual confidence does not fully protect him. The West of his story is not one tone. It can be funny, beautiful, bureaucratic, intimate, and suddenly terrifying. The Murfree brood darken that horror further near the end. Their violence feels less theatrical than the O'Driscolls and less ideological than Dutch. It is cramped, filthy, and inhuman in a different way. When the gang moves toward Beaver Hollow, the land already feels poisoned by what lived there before them. Arthur's final camp is not only bad because Dutch has lost himself, it is bad because the refuge itself has the smell of old cruelty in the walls. Arthur's journal gathers all these pieces without announcing that it is doing so. It holds mission notes, sketches, private doubts, jokes, animals, strangers, and little judgments about people he meets. The drawings are especially revealing because they require attention. A man cannot draw a bird, a plant, a building, or a face without looking for longer than violence usually allows. Arthur's art proves that he is not numb. He has trained himself to endure brutality, but some quiet part of him still studies the world. His handwriting changes the feeling of his thoughts. The journal does not read like a polished confession. It can be blunt, funny, ashamed, irritated, tender, or confused from one entry to the next. That unevenness makes him feel alive. Arthur is not writing for history. He is trying to put pressure somewhere. The page gives him a place to admit what he cannot say beside the fire, that Dutch is changing, that he has done wrong, that he does not know what kind of man he is becoming. The visions of the deer or the wolf give Arthur's inner state a wordless shape. A deer suggests gentleness, alertness, and a kind of grace that can survive without dominating. A wolf suggests hunger, isolation, and the harder path of a man moving through the dark with blood on him. These images do not need to lecture. They rise like dreams from the life Arthur has chosen and the choices still left before him. Even Arthur's clothes and weapons belong to his lore because they show how he carries history on his body. His hat becomes a family relic. His guns are tools, habits and burdens. His satchel holds letters, food, tonics, stolen goods, and fragments of other people's lives. He travels like a man who owns little that is truly his, yet everything he carries has a story. An outlaw's inventory is not just equipment, it is biography in leather and metal. Letters matter in that quiet biography. Mary's letters reopen a life he tried to bury. Newspaper scraps turn crimes into public stories. Notes from strangers turn small errands into moral decisions. Arthur lives in a world where spoken truth often fails, so paper becomes strangely intimate. A letter can hurt more than a bullet because it arrives without noise and asks him to remember who he might have been. Arthur's connection to the natural world becomes more poignant as he weakens. Early on, hunting and riding show competence. Later, the same landscapes feel like places where his soul can breathe. Open country offers a kind of honesty people often do not. A mountain does not lie about having a plan. A river does not demand loyalty. A deer does not pretend violence is philosophy. In the natural world, Arthur can be simply a dying man under a big sky. And sometimes that is more merciful than camp. The changing camps also trace Arthur's inner descent. Coulter is survival, Horseshoe is hope, Clemens Point is warmth and deception, Shady Bell is decaying grandeur, Lakay is exposure, and Beaver Hollow is spiritual rot. Arthur moves through these places like a man walking deeper into the truth of his own life. Each camp looks like the gang's situation before anyone explains it. By the time they live in a cave, the dream has already gone underground. Shady Bell is especially symbolic because it is a ruined plantation house full of old southern decay, ghosts of slavery and violence under elegance. The gang occupies it after driving out the Lemoyne Raiders, but the house never feels clean. It is shelter built inside another history's rot. Dutch's dream of freedom temporarily sits inside the architecture of oppression. The setting quietly says that the gang cannot escape history by hiding in picturesque ruins. Lakay in the swamps feels unstable and temporary. The gang returns from Guarma broken, and the swamp camp gives them no real rest. The Pinkertons find them quickly. The air feels wet, haunted, and unsafe. It is not a home. It is a pause between disasters. Arthur's sickness fits that environment. Damp, heavy, and hard to breathe. Even the landscape seems to know the gang is running out of time. Beaver Hollow is the final truth of Dutch's dream made physical. A cave is not a future, it is a hiding place. The gang began by talking about freedom under open skies and ends buried in darkness, surrounded by suspicion. Arthur's body is failing there, and Dutch's mind is curdling there. The camp's physical ugliness matters because it strips the myth away. This is what all the speeches have led to. Frightened people in a hole, still being told to have faith. Arthur's final ride, with the music rising and memories echoing, gathers the whole story into motion. He rides back knowing the truth about Micah, knowing Abigail has been rescued, knowing John must be warned, and knowing his own time is almost gone. The ride is powerful because it is not about uncertainty anymore. Arthur knows what must be done. After a life of confusion, loyalty, denial, and anger, the final purpose is clear. That clarity is a kind of peace, even before the violence begins. The song that accompanies the ride, the remembered voices and the changing landscape turn Arthur's life into something like a confession. He has no church, no trial, no formal absolution. He has a horse, a road, a dying body, and the memories of people he has helped or harmed. The ride says that a life is made of echoes. By the end, Arthur cannot outrun them. He can only ride through them honestly. When Arthur thanks his horse, the moment carries more weight because horses in the game are companions through almost every landscape. They carry him through snow, mud, cities, gunfire and quiet trails. Arthur's horse does not judge him, betray him, or ask for speeches. It simply stays with him until it cannot. His thanks is brief because he has no breath for more, but the emotion is complete. It is gratitude stripped to one sentence. The hat Arthur gives John becomes one of the clearest physical symbols linking the two games. In Red Dead Redemption, John's visual identity is already iconic, but the prequel gives that identity another layer. The hat is Arthur's, then John's, then part of the memory that moves forward. Clothing becomes inheritance. A dying brother leaves not a fortune, but a piece of himself that can be worn on the road ahead. Arthur's satchel and journal passing into John's possession also matter. John can read Arthur's words, see his drawings, and carry his unfinished record. This makes Arthur's interior life survive beyond death. The journal is not buried with him. It moves into the epilogue, where John's own entries begin to appear. The book becomes a bridge between men. Arthur the Watcher, John the Survivor, both writing inside a world that rarely lets men explain themselves fully. John's epilogue chapters are full of Arthur's absence. People mention him, remember him, or avoid saying too much because the wound is still there. John is not good at grief either. He carries Arthur more through action than speech, trying to build a home, trying to be better for Abigail and Jack, trying to live because someone died giving him the chance. Arthur's redemption is visible in every awkward step John takes toward domestic life. The building of Beecher's hope is therefore part of Arthur's legacy. Arthur never gets a house with Mary, never raises Isaac, never retires, never becomes a rancher. John, with enormous difficulty, builds the kind of settled life Arthur could not reach. The house is imperfect and future tragedy still waits, but for a time there is a roof, a family, and honest work. Arthur's last choice makes that possible. The ranch is built partly from his sacrifice. Sadie's later life as a bounty hunter also reflects Arthur's influence. She survives the gang and becomes independent, dangerous, and restless. Arthur did not create her strength, but their partnership helps carry her through the end. In the epilogue, she remembers him with affection and purpose. Like Charles, she becomes one of the people who proves Arthur was loved by those who understood what he became near the end. Charles's decision to leave for Canada after helping John suggests another possible future outside the old violence. He has always been one of the gang's most decent members, and his survival feels earned. Arthur's friendship with Charles belongs to this broader moral pattern. The people most capable of building something after the gang are those who never fully surrendered their conscience to Dutch. Charles, Sadie, Tilly, Mary Beth, Pearson, and others each carry a different kind of survival. Pearson later runs a store in Rhodes, and seeing him there can feel strangely peaceful. The old camp cook becomes a shopkeeper, still telling stories, still recognisable, but no longer trapped in Dutch's spiral. This small epilogue detail matters because it shows that some members did not need dramatic revenge or martyrdom. Some needed ordinary life. Arthur never gets that, but the fact that others do gives his world a wider sadness and a wider mercy. Tilly's later life, married and safe in St. Denis, is another small victory. She escapes the violence that might have swallowed her. Mary Beth's writing career is another. These outcomes matter because they prevent the gang's fall from being one single darkness. Some people get out, some become better versions of what they might have been. Arthur's sacrifice is not directly responsible for every survival, but his late choices belong to the same moral current. Get people out where possible. Dutch's later appearance at Mount Hagen shows a man hollowed out by the collapse. He no longer has the same command of the room. He is older, quieter, and harder to read. When he shoots Micah, it is not exactly redemption. It is too late and too small for that. But it suggests that Arthur's final words remain somewhere inside him. Dutch did walk away from Arthur, but he did not completely escape the truth Arthur told him. Micah's death is satisfying on one level, because he deserves punishment. But Red Dead rarely lets revenge remain clean. John killing Micah helps draw the attention that will eventually destroy his own future. That means Arthur's sacrifice and John's revenge exist in tension. Arthur wanted John to run and not look back. John looks back, and the old world finds him. This does not make John ungrateful. It makes him human, still bound to the same patterns Arthur died trying to break. Arthur is absent from the first Red Dead Redemption, because in the real world order he had not been created yet, but inside the story that absence becomes strangely powerful. John does not talk about him constantly, and that silence can be understood as grief, shame, or the simple fact that some debts are too deep for casual speech. Arthur becomes one of those dead people whose influence is everywhere and whose name is rarely enough. He is the reason John had a chance, even when the later world does not say it loudly. Arthur's entire life is therefore shaped by adoption, usefulness, guilt, and late mercy. Dutch adopts him, the gang uses him, violence stains him, illness exposes him, and the end transforms him. He is not a simple Western hero. He is a man who spent most of his life doing wrong for people he loved, then used the end of that life to do right for people who could still live. That structure is why his lore can be told slowly without losing force. Every chapter adds another layer to the same human problem. What can a guilty man do with the time that remains? One of the most interesting things about Arthur is that he is emotionally intelligent, but emotionally repressed. He understands people quickly. He sees weakness, fear, layers, affection, and foolishness. But he often cannot speak about his own feelings directly. He turns them into jokes, insults, actions, or silence. This makes his final honesty more powerful. When he finally says he is afraid, or tells John to go, or thanks his horse, the words are few because Arthur has spent a lifetime letting action speak first. Arthur's kindness often appears as inconvenience. He helps while complaining. He rescues while insulting. He donates while pretending not to care. He teaches Charlotte while acting gruff. He protects Jack with awkwardness. This pattern is important because it keeps him from becoming falsely polished. Arthur is not a gentleman in a simple way. His tenderness has burrs on it. But the tenderness is real, and the roughness sometimes makes it feel more truthful. The world Arthur lives in is also changing economically, not only morally. Railroads, oil, banks, industrialists, and private detectives show a country moving toward corporate order. Dutch claims to hate that world, but he cannot defeat it because he does not truly understand his own dependence on money and spectacle. Arthur, less ideological, senses the practical truth. The gang is running out of places. The open West is not simply being lost in poetry, it is being fenced, bought, surveyed, policed, and monetized. Arthur's story is set in 1899, but it carries the feeling of an ending age. The frontier myth is collapsing, The outlaw family is collapsing, Dutch's fatherly authority is collapsing, Arthur's body is collapsing. These collapses happen together, which is why the story feels so complete. Arthur is not dying in isolation, he is dying with the world that made him. The tragedy is personal and historical at the same time. This is why the title Red Dead Redemption fits Arthur so well, even though the first game belonged to John. Redemption in Arthur's case is not legal pardon, social acceptance or survival. It is a moral turn made under pressure. He cannot become a good citizen, cannot marry Mary, cannot raise a family, cannot pay back every victim, and cannot live long enough to prove himself for decades. He gets days, weeks, maybe a little more after the diagnosis. He uses them imperfectly, urgently, and finally sincerely. The entire lore of Arthur Morgan is interesting because it refuses easy comfort. If the story made him innocent, his redemption would be cheap. If it made him only evil, his final sacrifice would feel false. Instead, it makes him both deeply guilty and deeply human. He is a killer who draws flowers, a debt collector who helps widows, a loyal son who finally disobeys his father figure, a dying man who becomes more alive morally as his body fails. That contradiction is not a flaw, it is the reason he endures. Arthur's final sunrise works because it does not tell us everything is okay. It tells us he changed direction before the end. The sun rises whether Arthur lives or dies. The world continues. John rides away. Dutch disappears. Micah survives for a time. The Pinkertons still exist. But Arthur's face in the light says that his final moments are no longer owned by Dutch, Strauss, Micah, or the money. They are his. For a man who spent his life serving someone else's dream, that ownership matters. Arthur Morgan's entire lore can be understood as a movement from being taken in to letting go. Dutch takes him in as a boy. The gang takes his loyalty. The outlaw life takes his conscience piece by piece. Debt collection takes his health. Tuberculosis takes his future. But near the end, Arthur starts giving differently. He gives money to Edith and Archie. He gives skills to Charlotte. He gives help to Rainsfall. He gives loyalty to Abigail and John. He gives his hat, his horse's last thanks, his body, and finally, his remaining time. The man who spent years taking learns how to give. That is why his story stays so powerful. Arthur does not become interesting because he is secretly innocent. He becomes interesting because he is guilty and still capable of change. The past remains, the dead remain dead, the harm remains harm. But a life is not only a ledger, the final entries matter, especially when they cost something. Arthur's last goodness costs him comfort, safety, Dutch's approval, and finally the last strength in his lungs. That cost is what makes it real. In the end, Arthur is not saved from death. He is saved from meaninglessness. Tuberculosis kills him. The law still advances. The gang still falls. The century still turns. But Arthur's death has direction. He does not die chasing money, defending Micah, or repeating Dutch's fantasies. He dies having made one clear moral choice after another, late but not never. Red Dead Redemption. Understands that late is not the same as meaningless. Some men only become honest when time runs out, and the honesty still matters. And now, as the camp grows quieter, Arthur Morgan can be held in the mind not only as an outlaw, but as a whole life. The orphaned boy, Dutch's adopted son, Hosea's student, John's angry brother, Isaac's grieving father, Mary's lost love, the gang's enforcer, the debtor's nightmare, the artist with a journal, the sick man in St. Denis, the friend of Sadie, the helper of Charlotte, the defender of John, and the dying rider on the mountain. He was all of these things. None cancels the others. That is why he feels real. So let the fire settle low now. Let Horseshoe Overlook return to morning mist. Let Clemens Point rest by the water. Let Shady Bell sink into moss and memory. Let St. Denis fade into distant lamps. Let Beaver Hollow grow quiet. Let John's family ride on through the dark because Arthur gave them the road. Let the last sunrise touch the mountain where a tired man finally stopped running from himself. Arthur Morgan was not a perfect man, and that is why his redemption means something. He was late, he was guilty, he was afraid, and still, at the end, he tried. Let that be enough for the night.